Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our CPE speaker series. This is our last event of 2020. Really excited to have you all join us today. Thank you for taking the time out of what I'm sure is a busy last month for everyone as we're winding down for the holidays. We're very happy. We have a very exciting session and a little bit different than some of our usual CPE speaker series events for today. Today's event is focused on launching and scaling your educational scholarship and research career. So really thrilled to have you all join us. For those of you who might not know me, I think I know everyone on the call. My name is Annalise Mathers. I work with Zubin Austin and Lisa Dolovich to coordinate the Center for Practice Excellence events. Just before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and that this land continues to be home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I invite the audience to also consider a land acknowledgement for wherever you might be joining us from today. And yeah, thank you. So jumping into our kind of agenda for what's on schedule today, we have starting off a presentation by Naomi Steenhof. So I will introduce her shortly, and then we'll have panel remarks from our 4 panelists today. So that includes Annie Lee, Tim Mickleborough, Mike Felinas, and Henry Hallapi, who is also going to join us shortly. And then, so we'll use about the balance of the time, which should be about 30 minutes for open question and answer from the audience. So if there's things you'd like our presenters to elaborate on, or additional questions that you might have about any of the areas we're going to discuss, which includes everything from research to education to practice and kind of fostering excellence among our pharmacy graduates. I think all of our speakers today will be happy to answer any questions you might have. So without further ado, I will introduce Naomi Steenhof. So Naomi is an assistant professor at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy, which is a recent promotion. So congratulations again, Naomi. And she also holds a PhD in education. Currently, her research explores the crucial role of struggle in learning and understanding how conceptual knowledge development supports novice pharmacy students and their trajectory towards expertise. So Naomi really brings an absolute wealth of knowledge and experience in this area and in all the multiple roles she's held. So I will turn the floor over to her to get us started for today. Thank you so much, Naomi.
Great. Thanks, Annalise, for that kind introduction. I'm really happy to be here, especially with the panelists who will be speaking after me. There's a real wealth of experience in a variety of fields. So I'm hoping to kick this off. This is really aimed at, I guess, new researchers. I have slides, don't worry. And I'm looking at a lot of the people. I know a lot of the people on this call, which is great. It's a bit of a smaller group. So I'm going to try to keep things a little bit lean. And then if people have other questions afterwards, we'll have a little bit more time for discussion. So I'm going to share my screen. And can I just get a thumbs up from someone that you can see? Sorry, this. Thanks, Annalise. Perfect. Okay. So, right. So I'm going to spend the next 20-25 minutes talking about best practices in pharmacy education research. And this is meant to be practical, and it is. I know it's the end of the day. I'm exhausted after a long term, so I'm going to try to make this very practical, but it's going to seem funny to you because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is the importance of theory, which doesn't sound practical at all, but I'm hoping to change your mind in 20 minutes. So we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what research actually is. I'm going to talk about a framework to classify HP research. I am still a new education researcher, I think, but this framework I was introduced to about 5 years ago, and it's really helped me understand I think the ways to conduct good education research, and I'll sort of share my journey around that. So hopefully there'll be a bit of a story, which will be interesting as well. We'll talk briefly about research approaches to set you up for, or set our panelists up for some of their comments and perspectives. And if we have time, we'll get to practical issues as well. Right, so the good news is that pharmacy education research is growing, slowly, but it's growing. And one of the problems, I think, not that I want to get into the negatives, but I'm going to dive right in. One of the main problems that we have in pharmacy education research is that our research does not inform educational practice. Now, before you say, okay, like, why are you picking on pharmacy education research? This is a much larger problem than just in pharmacy education. This is happening in medical education and health professions education generally, nursing education. There's a lot of articles starting back from the early 2000s to this article by Cook, which I'll reference a little bit more later. And actually the editors of Advances in Health Sciences Education Journal, Jeff Norman and Rachel Ellaway, have just recently written about this problem as well. You know, this probably isn't surprising to you if you're a student on the call or if you're an educator. You probably realize, like, when you try to look at things like curriculum level research or simulation research, frankly, some of it can be a bit of a mess. A lot of it fails to advance science and it's hard to know how to utilize it. Even web-based learning, there's really great pockets, but trying to get something comprehensive, I think we're still running into some problems with that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about why I think that is, or why others think that is, and maybe what we can do a little bit about it as you're starting to approach, for those, if you're early on in your career looking at education research. So seeing this problem, what a lot of people say is, oh, that led to this call for a greater use of theory. And when I first came into the field, I was like, what does this mean? And I'm still going to ask you, what does this really mean for you and I? It can seem really complex, but it actually isn't. So I'm going to try to walk us through maybe what this means or why this might be a good solution to some of the problems that we have in pharmacy education research. And this is something that's applicable from day one, which is why as a panel and why I particularly wanted to talk about this. So in your mind, I want you to think a little bit about what you think research is. So don't think about like education research or science of teaching and learning research, just more generally what research is. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds just to think about that. I'm going to come back to it. So I wanted to start off by framing what we think pharmacy education research is, or what I think it is. This is sort of a definition taken from the health professions education literature. But what I want to focus on is that it's a study of general problems or phenomenon. This probably isn't surprising about learning, teaching, and education. But it aims at building on existing knowledge and understanding, which is why I have the bricks in this background. Every time I think about research and when I think of knowledge and the science of teaching and learning, I think about how what we know can be built on by other studies to help us, I guess, build on existing knowledge and understanding. Okay, so keep these bricks in your mind as, for the next, well, hopefully longer than 15 minutes, but for sure for 15 minutes. So when we think about research and how you come to research questions, I realized that coming to research questions is really no different than coming to any other questions you might have around everyday life, right? And we can see this in our own practice, whether it's pharmacy practice or in education or in teaching and learning. We come to questions based on personal or professional experience. Maybe you've seen a troubling pattern that you don't understand. Maybe there's a phenomenon that might be invisible to other people. You've talked to colleagues, you've read the literature. Maybe there's a lack of attention or awareness in your own area, or it's a way to sort of consider a question that would you get at what you wanted to know more about. So, you know, this is often like the first foray into really good research, right? Like is having a really good question. And I certainly came across this very early in my career as a practicing pharmacist. So I'm going to tell you sort of I'm going to tell you two stories, but I'm going to start off with this story first. So this is an article that was published a couple of years ago, but the story behind this is that the Faculty of Pharmacy here at U of T had changed its curriculum to an entry-level PharmD, and we had a lot more rotations, right? API rotations. We had to take a lot more students. And I was working on an internal medicine floor where we had always done like the traditional model of having one student with one preceptor and they work together and they assess them, and that was that. But I worked at UHN and we decided we needed to take more students on internal medicine is what we were being told. And we thought, you know what, let's try a 2-to-1 model or a 3-to-1 model like our colleagues in medicine, which we worked really closely with. We were used to seeing this model. We thought, okay, let's try it with our pharmacy students. So it's great. We tried it a little while. First, we had them like have students come for 5 weeks at a time together at the same 5 weeks. Then we started realizing, oh, you know, we should actually have the students for 10 weeks because 5 weeks is so short on internal medicine. Then we had the idea of staggering the students so they could actually teach each other. So one student would start for 5 weeks, their second 5 weeks, a new student would come and would overlap so they could do some training. Anyway, lots of tweaks that happened. And then we decided to I guess, survey the students about how they felt their experience was, and then it turned into this publication. Okay, so keep this in mind. This is sort of one story that I want to tell you in the next couple minutes. And I want us to go back to thinking about what research is, okay? So we're going to talk about, is what I did here research? If it is, what type of research is it? Is it good research? Is it bad? What are the strengths and weaknesses? So we're going to come back to that. So hopefully a few minutes ago, when I asked you to think about what research is, when I ask this with my students or in smaller seminars, a lot of people come back to the scientific approach, right? Which is great. We learned this in grade, I don't know, 4 or 5, depending on what school you went to, very early on, right? So you start at the front with, at the beginning with observation. You see something, you wonder about it, you develop a question. And then the scientific approach says, okay, now we need to develop or formulate a model or a hypothesis to explain our results. Then really importantly, we have to predict, right? So based on our model or hypothesis, we predict what will happen. Then we run a test and we test that hypothesis. Then we get to results, which then of course forms the observation for the next cycle. And we keep going to observation, model or hypothesis. We refine things, we predict things in a new way, and then we test them. So this is so familiar to us, I think, when we put our pharmacy, like our pharmacist hats on anyway. The important thing about this, back to the bricks, is one study provides a foundation on which subsequent studies can build. Sometimes I think of this as an iterative nature. So it's really easy to think about in other fields. So if we think about how our models of congestive heart failure develop, or how penicillin kills bacteria, or why the planets revolve around the sun, all of that came from this sort of scientific process. And what's the most important thing about all of those models is they allow us to predict, right? So our models of CHF allowed us to predict how to treat it. Our models of penicillin killing bacteria helped us to design new antibiotics. And our models of why planets revolve around the sun allowed us to send rockets to the moon. So this is something we're all really familiar with. So one of the critiques that we were talking about earlier, that I was talking about around pharmacy education research, is that pharmacy education research actually kind of tends to cut out some of the parts of this cycle. So we tend to focus on observation and testing. And again, it's not just pharmacy education research. This is happening in health professions education research, med ed, all of this. What we do is we omit model formation and prediction, which really helps. The problem we run into is we tend to not really have a very good cycle. We have a hard time building on it, on our previous results, because we miss some of these components. And what this really does is it limits our ability to predict what instructional methods and assessments will enhance educational efforts. So really, I think a way to simplify this is that one of our biggest problems is that there's a lack of scientific approach. And this is certainly not my idea, certainly not. This is something I've been exposed to over and again in my training, and something that David Cook has written quite a bit about. So I'm going to get into that in the next few slides. But if we come back to this paper that I told you about, right? And you don't have to go read it. And I've blocked out the other authors' names because I don't want to put them on the spot. I only want to put myself on the spot here. Because I would argue that this paper, even though it was very descriptive, had very little meaningful application for other people. Okay, so there wasn't really a science of peer-assisted learning that I used in this paper, that we used. Didn't have a conceptual framework. If someone else tried to use this research or this, like the results on another unit, it might be really, I think it would be very difficult for them to do, because I wouldn't be able to like sort of predict what the responses were. I just described what was happening. And so I would argue, looking back, that there wasn't a really great scientific approach with this paper. And at the time, I didn't really have the framework to think about this, but I want to introduce a categories of research framework that has kind of helped me think a little bit more about my own research. And then I'll share maybe a bit more of a positive experience or a way to incorporate the scientific method a little bit easier in your education research. So this comes from David Cook. I love this paper. It's a paper that he wrote in 2007. And this is where really he identified this problem in medical education research and in health professions education research more widely. So he said, okay, we have to better understand this problem, and we also should identify potential solutions. So he said it was helpful to consider the purpose of research. So why do we do education research? Why are you here? Why do you want to conduct research? Why have you conducted the research that you've done in the past? And the categories that he used, which I like, are description, justification, and clarification. So David Cook, what he did is he looked at a bunch of articles published between 2003 and 2004 in very prominent health professions education journals like MedEd, Advances in Health Sciences Education, those types of journals. I won't go through them all. And whittled things down to about 110 papers, which they then classified. I'll tell you what he found later. It probably isn't too surprising, but let's look a little bit more into his just what his categories are. So we're going to start off with description. This is simply what was done. It focuses on observation. So these are papers that are published that describe what was done or maybe present a new conceptual model. Again, it just really asks, what did you do? There tends not to be a comparison group, and there may be a description without the assessment of outcomes. Right, so examples of this are reports of novel educational interventions. So ding, 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 that was me. So definitely like fits under this category. A proposal for a new assessment method and a description of a new administrative process, that type of research. By definition, they really don't contain much of a comparison. The second category is justification. Did it work? So this really compares one intervention with another to address the question, does this new intervention work? We see this all the time with PBL research, so problem-based learning versus another type of intervention. We've seen this, I think I've seen a lot of these articles since COVID saying, okay, I've had to move my course online. How did this work compared to, or did it work compared to my more traditional methods or a lecture? So there absolutely can include RCTs, but without model formation and prediction, the results have very limited applicability to future research, or like I've been saying in the last 10 minutes about predicting, very hard to do that with justification research. And the final category would be clarification. So why or how did it work? The hallmark of clarification research is the presence of a conceptual framework or theory, right? So this is why people are saying, oh, the answer to some of these problems that we're experiencing in our field is theory, and this is exactly where that comes from. And the idea is that this could be affirmed or refuted by the results of the study. So this clarifies, so clarification studies tend to clarify processes that underlie observed effects. A lot of qualitative work falls into this category, actually, as a aside. Okay, so that's a very brief overview. If you want to learn more about this, the paper that I've referenced there is fantastic, very easy to find and highly cited. Another way to think about this is that descriptive and justification studies kind of look backwards and clarification studies look forward. That's just another, maybe an easier way to think about it. So back to Cook's study, what did he find? So he looked at 105 articles that were suitable for review. He found that 72% of those were justification studies. So lots of justification studies. 16% were descriptive studies, and only 12% were clarification studies. And so in this, he really argues that the use of theory and more clarification studies will help the science move forward and maybe help us get some progress on, whether curriculum issues or teaching methodology or those types of issues that we seem to still be muddling around with all these years later. Okay, so now I'm going to sort of share with you a bit of a different research journey, and like full disclosure, this sort of occurred on my journey between a master's and PhD, so that's what some of these studies are, but I want to show you sort of a way to take a research question that you might have and use theory to help develop a study that makes sense, but also you can build on and sort of leads to other research. And I want to clarify again, this is aimed at beginning researchers. It can look complicated, but actually it's not, and it's a way to produce very high quality best practices type of education research. Right, so I told you that I was working on internal medicine as a pharmacist. Those of you who know me well know that I actually had a teaching degree prior to coming to pharmacy school. So much fun to go to pharmacy school and with a teaching degree or education background and sort of see what worked well and what didn't, what followed best practices. So I had an interest in this in a long time. I was teaching on an internal medicine floor, and all kinds of questions came up. But one of the ones that kept bothering me the most is that I would get students from our faculty and like one of two things like kind of stuck out in my mind. I would either get a student who I knew was a superstar at the Faculty of Pharmacy. I was a CI in MTM courses for a long time. I would know who those superstar students were, and I'd be so thrilled when I got them. And like sometimes I'd get these students who had done so well in school, and they'd come on to our unit and they just didn't do well. They didn't seem to get what they were supposed to do. They didn't seem to remember anything from school. I'd send them to the emergency department. They'd wander up 2 hours later, not really sure of what to do or what they should have been doing. Really frustrating experience for both of us. They just really struggled through the whole rotation. But then the other thing would happen where I would get a student who maybe I'd even be notified by a coordinator, oh, this student's struggling. Do you mind taking them? They need a bit of extra help. And they'd arrive on the floor and they would do phenomenally. I don't know how. At the time, I didn't know how. I have a bit of a better idea now, but I didn't get it. They meshed well with the team. They anticipated issues. Their therapeutic knowledge seemed to be right there. And even though they hadn't done that well in school, when it came to using that information in a practical sense, they did great. And often they would leave the rotation. I'd be sad to see them go. And then they would often want to practice in that area later on. Or that's what they said to me anyway, which I get people say to their teachers a lot. Right, so this was a problem that I came across, and I began to think about it a little bit more. And I was really fortunate to work with a number of internists who had backgrounds in education, and they quickly told me, Naomi, what you're talking about is transfer. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, how does someone take what they've learned in one setting and use it in another? And this sort of got me on my track of wanting to do a master's degree. So I pursued that in the Netherlands and also did a research fellowship here in Toronto at the Wilson Center with a lot of great education researchers. And what I began to realize is, yeah, that's exactly it. I'm so interested in transfer. What do students do with the knowledge that we teach them in school? Why does some of that fade away? Why are some people able to transfer that into new situations and others can't? What is it about the way that knowledge is structured in your mind? And this quote stuck out with me from like the very beginning of all of this. They call this it is, however, the counterintuitive nature of the learning performance distinction that makes it so interesting and important from a practical and theoretical perspective. And so what Soderstrom and Bjork are saying here is that, it can sometimes look like someone knows a whole lot, but that can be very different than learning. Or the assessments that we use in school, sometimes students can perform well on that, but learning might be something totally different. Right, so I was already starting to, without knowing it, I'm trying to approach this problem using a theory to try to like develop an experiment or try to understand more about it. So very briefly, this led me to the following theoretical framework. It's not as complicated as it may seem, right? I began to be interested in, I was interested in transfer. What are different ways that people can learn that make it easier or more difficult to transfer? I began to get very interested in a specific type of transfer, which is inventing to prepare for future learning, which led me to a teaching methodology or instructional design strategy called productive failure, which is what a lot of my research ended up fitting into, right? So I saw this problem, realized it was about transfer, used these theories to start to think about the problem in a different way that I would have been able to without those ideas. In the interest of time, and because it's a smaller audience, I'm going to jump over models of expertise. So what I want to show you is the design of my first study. This was small, okay? It reached power, but look, I'm looking at 40 students, 40 pharmacy students, and my design was okay. So I want to take some first-year pharmacy students and teach them something new. So I'm going to put 21 of them in a direct instruction condition and 19 of them where they were randomized into a productive failure condition, and then see how they did. And I was very curious to see, okay, how did they acquire their knowledge? How was it applied? But more importantly, how were they able to transfer that into a new situation? And so by using that theoretical framework, I could design a very nimble, small, inexpensive, easy to do study that made a lot of sense, that not only was useful for pharmacists, but also advance the science on the cognitive psychology side as well. Or in a very small way, but it was a brick. It was a small brick, as I remind myself. So it led to the following study, which was published in AZ, actually just in 2019, which seems a lot longer ago. But anyway, so productive failure is an instructional approach to promote future learning. All out of this question of why do some students seem to do really well in placements when they leave school and others not, and it doesn't always align with their marks. Other research questions that were generated out of this because of the use of that theory is, do students need to attempt to generate their own solutions to experience the benefits? Could pre-testing effects be optimized using these principles? What is actually occurring? So all of this fits under clarification study because of the use of theory. And it led to, and this is a very annoying slide, but it really just shows how all of these different theories can underpin or support the questions that I had in my own research design. right? So it's not about whether I do qualitative or quantitative work or mixed methods. All of that's important from a methods and methodology perspective. But the more important thing is what's your question and what is your theory or your approach to understanding the question, which I know our speakers on the panel will talk a little bit more. Some of them will as well. And this has also led to these types of future directions. So how do I translate this into different educational settings, right? Using this theory, what else do I want to know? What do people believe about learning through struggle? What are like ways to approach conceptual knowledge? And then quite a few other experimental directions as well. Okay, so want to talk very briefly about research approaches after sort of hopefully sharing a brief story with you. So if you're early on in your research and you're wondering sort of like where to start or how this all fits together for you, I find this blurry image taken from washington.edu is really helpful, right? So we look at starting with a clear research question. And now if you understand how it's grounded in that relevant theory, then you can use a methodology to generate an appropriate method, which then leads to this cycle. And I find that this is so helpful and has helped me understand why a good theory underpins all good education research if we're thinking about how to build and grow and to design things that contribute to knowledge and improvement. I'm including this because it relates directly, I think, to a little bit of what Tim's going to be talking about. I love this image from Cresswell. He has a really good research book for health professions education. And you can see again here how, we often think about who does qualitative research or who does quantitative research, but so much of that has to do with the type of question you're asking and the approach that you're taking. If we had more time, we'd talk about philosophical worldviews, but this is so important and relates directly to theory, and your beliefs about the world and the way that knowledge is formed in the world will absolutely influence your design and your research methods. So even though this is aimed at people who are early on in your career and you may think, oh, this may come later, this is actually super foundational. So I just wanted more to get us thinking about when we're talking about really good research, what that's grounded in and why. So I just thought, oh, well, this will maybe help us start thinking about where research is situated in the larger health professions education community. I'm going to, I think, wrap it up soon. 2 points. So very practical issues that have come up. So around the top, if we look at reviewing the literature, that can be really daunting. There is a lot of research in these areas. And I think one of the mistakes that I made, both in that first paper that I showed you, but also just generally, is reviewing the literature on my own was just like overwhelming and didn't help me. And what really helped is if I did this other point here of pairing up with a more experienced researcher, someone who knows the field well. So through my fellowship and through my PhD studies, my supervisors, Nikki Woods and Maria Milopoulos, and actually Zubin Austin as well, they were really helpful in pointing me in the right direction. I remember one particular instance with Zubin where I'd been like looking up like emotion and struggle and how people feel about failing. And he was able to point me to a few really good papers that would have been lost in my like 100 papers that I downloaded with the librarian. So I think that's a way to become more nimble and practical where you don't have to spend, a whole year and a half getting to know the literature super well. Working with someone who can point you in the right direction can really help make you more efficient and helps you to contribute to a larger conversation. This idea of understanding the conversations that are happening in journals and in the field, that's so hard to access as sort of an outsider. But if you can find someone to pair up with, they can really help you, I think, skip over some of the, no, not skip over, but like access some of the bigger questions. Because the last thing you want to do is design a research project that's trying to answer a question that was maybe answered 15 years ago by another researcher. Lots of questions about money and time. Most of my research takes like $2,000, which isn't too much in the grand research scheme of things, right? Because especially when you consider our basic science colleagues who are in the tens of thousands at the very beginning. You want to think about time. I know there was a question from one of the students that Annalise let me know about is like, how do you get time during work? This is really hard. This is where the practical side of things come from. So where are your questions coming from? How are they not only helpful for your department, but maybe helpful for advancing the science generally? And I have been fortunate to have very, very, very good managers who have understood that I had a passion for this, but I also needed to be strategic to think about, okay, how is this going to help the department? So even that peer-assisted learning paper that I've kind of just ripped apart a little bit, it was helpful for our department internally. I'm not saying descriptive research isn't good. It was helpful for us to see, and summarize our students' experiences. But the other piece that I wanted to add to this is, giving back as well. So I think within my own departments, whether it's been at a hospital level or here at the faculty, recognizing that you have the opportunity to do that research to share back with the people who it'll also affect. So either whether it's at the faculty or at the hospital, obviously disseminating that research through conferences, but recognizing that it's not just taking time out of work to do your own type of project, that you are able to give back. And I found that that was a useful strategy for me when I've been trying to do this while working and teaching and doing other things. So it is possible to do these projects while you're doing other work, as long as you're organized, keep them small and nimble. And I think we'll hear a bit more talk about that on the panel. And then remembering the role of predictions and theories and how that is helpful for you when you're thinking about designing a study, and that there is a way to embed small, excellent studies within the literature to sort of achieve both purposes, which I would say is, I would argue, is the point of research, which you probably picked up on from the beginning of my talk. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think I'm at my 25 to 30 minutes. What I would say is, if this is interesting and you haven't come across this, there's a famous letter to the editor by B.K. Forsher called Chaos in the Brickyard. This was actually turned into a little comic strip by Matteo Farinella, which I have the URL down there. I really like the comic strip. I think it really gets to the point of the letter. You can also look up the letter. It was written, I think, in the 60s, and talks about this problem around knowledge building, the importance of theory, and how a whole lot of information or a whole lot of descriptive data that is atheoretical actually may not actually advance science more generally. So this was less about health professions education and more about science generally. So I want to say huge thank you to many researchers at the Wilson Center here at the faculty. So Zubin, Nikki Woods, Maria Milopoulos have helped me think a lot about theory and the way that that interacts with my work. But I wanted to make it really practical for you as an early stage, because I think sometimes we hear it and we don't really understand how to use that properly. So I'm going to sign off and stop sharing. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I know it's, like I said, it's been a long term, it's been a long day. We're heading into December, but it's nice to see you here. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Annalise and our panelists. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Naomi. And thank you for, I think, looping us in with so many practical tips. I think that's definitely raised a few questions for me that I think we'll get to at the end of our session today, and hopefully stirring up lots of thoughts within our audience members as well. I am going to introduce our first panelist for some remarks, but just want to speak to kind of what Naomi was touching on. We have a wide variety of things that our panelists are going to bring their lens of expertise to today, looking at conducting research with minimal funding in a lean and agile way, beginning with smaller scale research projects that really maximize your contribution to a field, planning a research project that's really strongly rooted in theory and evidence, like Naomi's talked about, hiring and recruiting students to assist with your work, and also accessing funding, partnerships, and resources to support your research. So with all of that in mind, if any questions do come up, feel free to type them into the chat box. We'll get to them after panel remarks. But I will introduce our first panelist for today, who's Henry Halapi. He is currently a pharmacist with the Kidney and Metabolism Program at St. Michael's Hospital at Unity Health, Toronto. Henry is a graduate of the University of Toronto Faculty of Pharmacy Program and also the Wayne State Doctor of Pharmacy Program at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. Henry is involved in the teaching of pharmacy students both at the undergraduate and graduate levels here at LDFP, and he also acts as the education coordinator for the St. Michael's Hospital Pharmacy Department. So that being said, Henry, I will pass it over to you. You should be able to put up your slides whenever you're ready as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I appreciate that. And can everybody see my slides okay? Thank you, Annalise. So good. So thank you very much for having me to come and present. And I'm going to talk to you about a project that I've been involved in, and very much as Naomi was saying, it generated from a practical need and asking questions in the actual workplace-based setting about education, in particular pharmacy education. So if I look at sort of where this came from, and this OPCAT project, and this is about the Ontario Patient Care Assessment Tool that we use now very much for our API and EP rotations here at Leslie Dan, but it's also used in the pharmacy residency programs and a number of other programs across the province. And if I really think about where this came from, so a little over a decade or so ago, there was a desire to move pharmacy residency programs into competency-based education and outcomes, and doing that. And being a pharmacy residency coordinator, really my questions came around what, how could we do this? What does this involve? Where do we go with this? And it was really a question that we all as residency coordinators at that time were really struggling with. How do we kind of go about and do this and set this up and do these assessments of our residents? It made a lot of sense to us at sort of a higher level that we're really trying to graduate people from pharmacy residency program who achieve sort of various endpoints and outcomes and things. And so really understanding what that need was, what the work was a key point about this and things. And ultimately, the start of this work then led to a result to the actual tool development, which we now share and use across various programs in the province. And I'm going to walk you through some of this and how this came. And as Naomi was saying earlier, that a lot of the work, when we started on this, really had to do with starting to look at the literature. Well, what did that really mean, competency-based assessment? How did this occur? Where did this come from? So there was certainly a fair bit of reading, and not only about looking into the subject, into the literature itself and things, it was also talking to some people who are more experienced in this area. I can certainly say that reached out to Zubin Austin for some advice in this area as we started our work down this path. So I think that's really practically a very important part of this, looking for more experienced researchers, looking for individuals who are able to help and guide us along the way and sort of set us in the right direction really did help with what seemed like a very difficult and large sort of task to do early on. So we really looked at a series of, there were 4 educational institutions, educational programs in Ontario that really had the same question at the same time. So pharmacy residency programs, which I represented at that point there. And in addition to that, the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy was also looking for a standardized patient care assessment tool as well too. The new University of Waterloo Pharmacy program was also looking for a direct patient care assessment tool for their API rotations as well. And in addition, the Ontario College of Pharmacists was also looking for a field-based assessment tool for assessing people going through their PACE program or their testing program for licensure. So ultimately, we had the 4 stakeholders, and really what we realized when starting to work together and to come together is that we utilized a similar pool of pharmacist preceptors that really were calling on the same people to do these various rotations and assessments out in the field. And since it really then started to behoove us that maybe it would make sense if we all kind of collaborated and came up with a single assessment tool that we could then use across all of these programs all together. So certainly that was a large part of the impetus. And it's sort of one of the other big learnings that I had too about sort of that collaboration in doing projects like this and in research and things. And we really felt that this would have multiple benefits, more consistent assessments ultimately for our learners, and simplify preceptor training as well too. And so when we had our various collaborators together, these 4 organizations came together, and I would certainly, I collaborated with Annie Lee, who will be speaking some more about this as well too, Ken Manson at the University of Waterloo, and Diana Spitzeri from the Ontario College of Pharmacists. And really, one of the things that we then did was then to just really clarify what we wanted to do, design the assessment tool that could be used by all 4 of our pharmacy organizations to measure competencies and standards required by each of the organizations. So designing the tool was a fair bit of the work, and then we looked at, so what would be the best way to go about and implement this, and how do we then roll this out across the 4 programs, and then ultimately trying to then see how well it's working later on. So with getting a sense of our practicality, usability, and satisfaction by the tool users. So we had some development timelines, and we really started back in about 2014. So it's been a number of years of journey where we started working on the actual tool development. So early on at that point in time, and to try and actually put the tool together. And we looked at a number of things. We looked at standards out there in the actual standards of practice out there that touched upon the 3 different areas. So we were interested in AFPC educational outcome standards. We're interested in the NAPRA standards, and we're also interested in the Canadian Pharmacy Residency Board standards. This tool had to be able to kind of measure what was sort of contemporary pharmacy practice in the direct patient care settings across to meet all of these standards. So we really looked at setting up a framework. And this is where the literature really helped guide us. We really wanted to come up with a competency-based assessment framework, something that was easy to use. So using a 5-point Likert scale is what we settled on. In addition to that, that was underpinned by the solo taxonomy. So we really did some looking into taxonomies, what would be the best taxonomy for this kind of field-based longitudinal type of assessment as well too. And then we looked at some of the practical things, and we found that would help with this. And we found that putting together a guidebook and a glossary that would then explain the various components of the actual assessment tool would make a big difference for us as well too. Ultimately, the design of the tool had to be generalizable, not specific to any other program, but still allow for the tailoring of the tool for each program in terms of their own particular grading policies, et cetera, that were needed. So it needed to measure sort of through a broad width of sort of contemporary direct patient care pharmacy experiences in the fields, allowing it to be used in a wide range of learning programs, the various universities, the residency programs, and at the college level too, and also across a wide range of patient care settings. We really thought that we didn't want something that's specific to an inpatient hospital and then something that would be only specific to community, but something that would measure what are the common things that all pharmacists do in direct patient care across all of these different settings. So really trying to think that through and setting that up. And this is really where that sort of collaborative nature of this really helped with the design of this tool. Ultimately, we ended up with 5 main domains, which were further subdivided into 21 elements. And these 5 main domains would really describe what would be the what would be reflective of contemporary pharmacy practice. So these were things about the actual patient care process, collaboration, professionalism, incorporating the drug distribution process and patient safety, and sort of managing oneself in the practice environment. Just to give you a snapshot of the actual pharmacy patient care assessment tool, or OPCAT, that we came up with and all, is listed here? Well, really, we at the various domain elements are listed at the left, and on top there is the 5-point Likert scale underpinned by our solo taxonomy, which then the assessor can use in order to provide an actual score. The descriptors will then guide the assessor in order to provide an actual assessment of the observed performance of the learner. So, and level of performance to a higher level of performance from left to right, and they change in terms of the amount of guidance that the assessor, the learner requires to perform that particular domain element, and the amount of how effective they are and how consistent they are in doing this. And so by setting it up in this manner and utilizing the changes in guidance across the behavioral descriptors as one moves up from a number 1 to a number 5, really helped formulate a method of assessment that was more that our preceptors found simpler to use. And there's just a bit more here in terms of our behavioral descriptors. I've just highlighted 1.1 here, just in a bit of larger text here so that one can see, we can see sort of the minimal guidance consistently and effectively when one gets to higher levels here. I mentioned that we had a glossary where we put in a guidance gradient to really help define what the glossary was. Or the amount of assistance required in order to perform the observed activity. Then finally, about 2016, we got to implementation across the 4 programs. So we started off with the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy's implementation, and in early 2016, and by early 2017, the last program, the University of Waterloo, was able to implement the tool as well. And this was really facilitated by having, again, a collaborative approach amongst the four sponsoring organizations, where we came up with a set of standardized preceptor and assessor training around the tool. So a series of pre-workshops with readings, self-assessments as well, and an in-person workshop pieces as well as an online module. So different things were available to different preceptor groups, but there was a fair bit of redundancy, so that if one preceptor didn't get it in one area, they certainly would have gotten it in another area. So this is a sort of overall collaboration that worked out. Finally, about 2019, we've been looking at actually just seeing how well the tool is working, getting some more direct feedback from that, trying to see if we needed some updates. And we've made some updates to the tool based on some of the feedback that we've received. So there's a very surveys that we did and interviews trying to get some of that more specific information. And basically our post-satisfaction survey here that we did, we added in an additional domain element under our professionalism, expanded our glossary, and kept remapping our tool against updated national standards. So having walked you through our OPCAT journey here, really what in the end, this collaborative approach really helped develop address the original need that we had. What do we do? How do we come up with an assessment tool for the current assessment milieu that existed? And we addressed that need with a well-developed assessment tool that was suitable for formative assessment and feedback giving, as well as summative assessment. But I think a lot of the learning and things about this process and doing these types of creative professional type of activities is that really the key is collaboration. I've really found that this kind of educational research, like many other types of project, is really a team-based approach kind of works best. And there's no doubt by having the collaboration amongst 4 organizations, and although there was some ground setting and required and things earlier to get that going, it certainly produced a more fruitful and useful product later on for us. The network building that came along with that as well too. So being able to reach out to various experienced individuals, reach out to experienced individuals across the country, as well as tap into its various key peoples along the way locally, has really helped benefit the process, and has also been a great sort of piece of learning that's come out. And sort of for me personally, the experience of having worked on this project, having learned a lot more in the process about tool design, as what are good practices in an assessment tool design, and about assessment, has certainly made me a better teacher within the residency program, within the student program as well too. So there's a bit of giving back that comes from that in that regards, to sort of close the whole loop on things. So with that, I think I will end my section. So and hand it back to Annalise. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Henry. You can also take whatever call you need to at the same time. Annie, I will introduce you next. Annie Lee is our next panelist and is an associate professor at the teaching stream at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy here at the University of Toronto. She graduated from LDFP as well as McMaster University's Master of Science in Teaching program. She's been actively involved in enhancing peer teaching, mentoring, and the development of assessment tools for the PharmD program and the interprofessional education curriculum at the University of Toronto. She's been recognized nationally and provincially for her teaching, precepting, and enhancement of pharmaceutical care. So whenever you're ready, Annie, I will pass it over to you, and you can also put your slides on the screen.
Okay, thanks, Annalise. I'm having a bit of problems with my bandwidth, so if I break up, let me know, and then I'll turn off the video. So I know we're a bit tight for time, so I'm going to make it quick. Let me just share my slides. Okay, let me know if you can't hear me. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the research part and some of the research I've done, and some of it, could be in the as different phases of research in terms of descriptive or justification part, as Naomi was talking about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the OPCAT project. Henry did a very good description of the project, so I'm mainly focusing on the testing, funding, and human resources. I'll touch a little bit on the interprofessional assessment tool that I worked on, which is similar to the OPCAT project, except it's with an interprofessional lens. And then talk about a little bit about small scale projects, especially for those of you who are starting out with your research, and any focus on education as part of your research. So Henry mentioned the OPCAT timeline. My focus is going to be on the boxes that I've outlined, the focus group, and also the satisfaction survey. So with the OPCAT project, we did various components in terms of testing, development, and of course the big thing is collaboration. The first thing I want to talk about is the focus groups. So for our earlier versions, we did a focus group to give us feedback on the tool, because it was a brand new tool. No faculty, Waterloo, U of T, UBC, anywhere across Canada had used a similar type tool. None of the regulatory bodies like OCP and none of the national residency programs had used such a tool. So we needed some feedback to revise the tool before we did implementation. So what we have done for the whole project is what you could call a mixed method, in which we did qualitative and quantitative type analysis on the tool. So one of the big things with this project is research ethics. So if you're considering doing any project, and even any educational project, and any collaborative project, one of the big things is research ethics. So getting that in was a bit complicated. We had University of Waterloo, University of Toronto, Ontario College of Pharmacists, and the Canadian Pharmacy Residency Board, all as part of the project. So initially what we did is we went through U of T, We got letters from the other organizations saying they're a collaborator on the project, and they provided sort of almost like yes acknowledgement that this is what they're participating in. Once we got the approval from U of T, then we went to the University of Waterloo and got research ethics, and it was a lot easier once it went through U of T. We decided not to go to the academic teaching hospitals because it was another longer research ethics process, and we just didn't want to go through all those steps and try to go to every single hospital in which our students would be placed or would use the tool to do that. So we just sort of kept it within the 4 organizations, but even that took quite a bit of time. So keep that in mind when you're doing collaborative projects. They do take a little bit more time than doing a single site research project. In terms of funding for the focus group, we were able to luckily get funding from the 4 organizations because it was a smaller amount. In human resources, I was able to recruit a graduate student from the University of Toronto as a side project to do this, and she did a really good job with the focus groups. After we had implemented the tool, we did a satisfaction survey of all 4 organizations. And again, you know, we went through the research ethics similar type process. Funding. So in this instance, funding was not obtained from the organizations because they already gave us some funding. So we applied for funding through the universities, both universities, University of Waterloo, University of Toronto. We applied for funding within the faculties, you know, the Faculty of Pharmacies, and we applied for funding through the professional organizations such as CSHP. So luckily we were able to get a Lightseed grant from the University of Waterloo to help us with the manpower human resources for the satisfaction survey. So I was able to hire some students or graduates from our program who we knew were good in terms of research, help us with this survey because it was across 4 different organizations and different, I guess, groups in terms of preceptors, students, etc. The one thing you also have to think about with collaborative research projects is where you're storing the data. So when you're collecting this data, it's from 4 different organizations. So there's got to be some understanding and meet the ethics requirement for storage of your data. The other thing we did with this is look at validation testing. So we did content and face validity. At the Ontario College of Pharmacists, they did standard setting, so it didn't cost us any money. And then that standard setting was later adapted by the University of Waterloo. And at U of T, we're also considering adapting that. The one little hiccup we have is when you have a instrument or a tool, one of the basic things that you do to validate the tool is factor analysis. So one hiccup we had with this was that it was difficult for us to get the data. So after the tool is used and you used enough that you have enough data, what you need for the factor analysis is data points. So you need the data points from forms that have been filled out by preceptors, by students, by assessors, by residents, by residency preceptors. So it was hard to get these data points, some logistical issues with that. So unfortunately, we couldn't get the factor analysis done. We also needed some funding to hire a psychometrician to help us with the factor analysis. And so the funding, the data acquisition, that was quite difficult with the 4 organizations. So unfortunately, that didn't get done, but something we would have liked to get done. Just going to talk about the interprofessional collaborative competency tool. So this was almost done a little bit later, a few years after we started OPTAT. So I was part of an interprofessional team that worked on this project. So the initial need was from the Council of Health Science Deans at the University of Toronto. So with several faculty members from different health science faculties that worked on this project, in addition to the IPE office. So funding was obtained through the IPE office. And again, it was developing a tool. It was collaborative. We did testing. You can see the testing there, the interviews, and we did a pilot. And fortunately for us, we were able to do factor analysis on this because we were able to gather and keep the data and use the data for factor analysis. So keep in mind with collaborative projects that it takes longer. So it took us over 2 years, which is shorter than the OPCAT, but still a very long time because if you're developing tools and validating tools, it takes quite a bit longer because it's a two-step process. Just want to quickly talk about these small scale projects, things to keep in mind. So the two projects I previously talked about, OPCAT and the interprofessional competency assessment, those are big projects. They take several years, collaborative, and the research ethics we had to do for the interprofessional one, we had to go to TASN hospitals. So that took several months to get ethics approval through a TASN hospital. We had to submit it, resubmit it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why those projects are quite long in terms of working on it. So you have to be patient and you have to be dedicated to those projects. If you want to start off something small, and then it's the quality improvement, quality assurance projects, not as impactful for sure, but it just gets your feet wet. So some of the projects I've been working on, peer mentoring, peer tutoring, and I get students involved in these projects. So they don't have to be high level projects for students, but they get their feet wet in terms of working on projects and thinking about what these projects involve so that they can build on it for later research as well. I just recently also got a teaching innovation grant from the faculty to work on the academic electronic health record project. So this is also another collaborative project with different faculty members at the Leslie Van Faculty of Pharmacy. So you can start with small scale projects, get your feet wet, and then get into more larger projects and get into projects that have more impact as well. In terms of involvement with students, I use students across the board. So I use API students, those are students in placements. And those students, once they get their feet wet, they want to keep on getting involved. So those students will keep on volunteering to work with me, even though they're not doing their rotations. Students who have graduated, who are graduates, they also want to be involved. So you can keep all of those things in mind. There's work study students that you can hire that can also help with the projects, and they don't cost as much as hiring a formal research assistant with that. So I think I'm just going to leave it there. And I'll hand it back to Annalise.
Perfect. Thank you, Annie. And thanks for chipping us along with our schedule for today. I think all of these remarks are so important, and it's so good to hear from everyone. But in the name of time, I will pass it over to our next panelist, who is Tim Mickleborough, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Wilson Center at the Temerity Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto. His research examines professional identities and the dynamic boundary processes that have become a reality of contemporary professional life. He's been also published in academic medicine and medical education. Really pleased to have you join us today, Tim. I will pass it over to you to take it from here whenever you're ready. And just so you know, you're on mute, but your slides look great.
I think after 2 years, you'd know by now, right? So hello, everyone. My name is Tim Mickleborough. I'm a pharmacist and a postdoctoral fellow at the Wilson Center. Today, I'll be discussing social theory and its potential for pharmacy research. So how can social theory, I'm just going to adjust these buttons here. How can social theory help the early careers researcher? Well, the theme of the topic today, of course, is how to conduct lean but impactful research with minimal funding. And that is strongly rooted in theory and practice. And fortunately, social theory can meet this criteria. I know in science that we like larger sample sizes to improve the validity and generalizability of the results. However, larger and more expensive studies may not always be helpful for examining social problems. In a nutshell, I think research grounded in social theory does not necessarily require large numbers, may not cost as much, but it could reveal more valuable evidence. And as some of you may or may not be familiar with this type of research, I will briefly comment on a range of social theories that are applied to qualitative research in education and in healthcare, and collectively these are known as critical theories. So what is social theory? What do I mean by social theory? Well, these are theoretical frameworks. I think Naomi had indicated about the importance of theory in education research. So basically, they're a guide to understand problems that can't be easily explained from our personal or professional experience. So let's say you think about professional identity, which I study, it's hard to pin down. You can't see it. So how can you study it? So not only do social theories help conceptualize complex problems, but it allows us to think about problems in a much wider context. So not just, at the individual or institutional level, but a very wide systemic level. So we can think about the economy, we can think about systems of oppression. So we can think about these larger systems and how they affect us in our everyday lives. So what really attracted me to social theory is the fact that it does open up and it challenges your understanding and ultimately changes the way that you think about the world. So before I kind of venture off into the unknown, it may be helpful to understand where you're located research-wise. And I think Naomi had alluded to this when she talked about Cresswell. And you've probably seen in qualitative analysis books and these columns of different research paradigms. So as you know, or may not know, different research paradigms have different rules. So when you use social theory, it operates under a set of rules that make sense for that theory, but it may not make sense for science research. So they come at different ontologies. So this is the nature of reality, or epistemologies. This is the way of knowing that reality. So of course, science believes that a single reality exists, which can be measured and studied, and it can be known objectively. So positivism, or the scientific method as you know it, strives to generate simple, generalizable findings that have broad applicability. So these are fundamental principles to research the natural or physical world. But the scientific method and related qualitative research is also used to look at the social world. Pharmacy, for example, researches social issues, so identity, professionalism, contingent labor, interprofessional collaborations, etc. And it produces measurable and objective understandings that are in line with the scientific rigor. But however, I think it's important to ask questions about our current research methods. Are we seeing the complete picture? Is there something that we're missing? How can we capture some of the complexity of the social world? How can we be informed, and how can we study social phenomena informed by methods that take into account particular aspects of power, privilege, culture, and knowledge? So what is power? Well, that seems like a weird thing to study, but it is a fundamental concept in social science theory, in as much as energy is a fundamental concept of physics. So it's just what we look at. But what I mean by power is that critical theories offer approaches that acknowledge there is a role of power and social position in health-related research. And from this standpoint, power can be seen as a negative force that disadvantages some groups over others based on social difference. So you think about class differences, race, gender, sexuality. So one of the first theories that examine this power differential is Marxist theory. So a not common approach in pharmacy. But when we think of Marx, we think of class distinctions that privilege the wealthy over lower income groups. However, current studies and professions use principles of Marxist theories to examine things like capitalism, and in particular, healthcare state reform. So in one study from nursing, which I've cited here, it's an older study, but they interviewed 38 nurses, which I think is a large study for qualitative work, and how the shift from hospital to the community-based care had a profound impact on their personal and professional lives. In the study, researchers unpack, so that's an important word in the social theory. We kind of take common sense understandings of things and dig a little deeper and unpack them and figure things out. So they unpack the ideology, again, a good Marxist term, of the family. So this term of the family was used as part of state rhetoric, as part of government rhetoric, that tried to convince the public that families could provide better care for non-critically ill patients than hospitals, thus justifying their cuts to healthcare. So making hospital stays shorter. So researchers made visible how this shift, if you think of from hospital to your family taking care of you, had a profound burden on lower income families, but it also resulted in a loss of full-time employment for practicing nurses. So we can also look at a group of theories, and obviously I can't go through them each one, but I can group them together as anti-feminist, anti-racist, queer theories, and intersectional theories. Again, these studies are more difficult to find in pharmacy. So again, looking to the nursing literature, there are many studies that specifically looked at racism within the nursing profession. In a small qualitative study, so there's only 10 participants who identified as nurses and a South Asian. So the author examined their marginalization in the nursing profession, but also exposed its racial hierarchies. So critical theories explore how our institutions, our professions, our academic institutions, for example, how they create systemic inequalities perpetuated on the basis of social difference. So again, gender, class, sexuality, ability, etc. So although these theories have different focus, their main function, and this is the ontology of critical theories, is to create change, to improve the conditions of those who are disadvantaged. Intersectional approaches, if you think about it as the word, they take these notions of social inequity, but from the perspective that, we don't just exist in one area of distinction, but we're constructed from multiple systems of oppression. So this particular author, she was able to examine these intersections of gender, race, and immigrant status, and how these materialize for these participants who had insurmountable barriers with respect to advancement in their own profession. So the author was able to trouble the notion of diversity in professions as she made visible the inequities that exist in healthcare institutions. So even though we have a diverse professional body, it doesn't mean that everyone has equality. So post-colonial theories, again, not a lot in pharmacy, but I've included an example from my own research. This was from my master's research project, where I looked at the integration experiences of international pharmacists in rural communities in Canada. I had a small sample size, but despite this, I found a way of getting it published in a medical education journal that my co-author and I wrote a commentary about methods. So commentaries, lit reviews, even book reviews, these are low-cost ways of getting published and getting citations for your CV. In this commentary, we compared my study using post-colonial approaches to a similar study of international medical graduates in rural communities that used more traditional or science-based qualitative approaches, okay, so non-numerical data. In our critique, we felt that traditional qualitative methods were not suitable for all study participants. So there's not a one-size-fits-all model for qualitative research. We felt that researchers need to be sensitive when researching marginalized or racialized groups, as they require methods that can focus on their unique experience without glossing over the reality, which I think happened in the IMG study. It looked at retention of international medical graduates in rural communities, but failed to really explore the potential that perhaps racism in small white communities could be a reason why physicians didn't stay. Post-colonial approaches can make visible how power relations situated within our colonial past still have power today to marginalize certain racial or ethnic groups. Again, this wasn't a large study, but when a study like this one or the one previously I talked about the nurses, when they're theoretically grounded in social theory, that theory amplifies the transfer of those findings. It may be 10 participants, but when you connect it to a larger body of literature, then it links that particular phenomenon to a broader knowledge base. So, I wasn't trying to prove that there was racism in small communities, but I did gain an understanding of how the effects of colonialism and how they manifest in diverse professions like pharmacy. And my doctoral work also confirms how international training acts to marginalize and construct some pharmacists as professional others. There's a lot of social theories, and a lot to choose from. These are the ones I'm most familiar with. I included Foucault. He's not considered technically critical, but he's often used in healthcare research. He challenged our notion of power. When we think of the power in the previous examples, or we think of power as kind of this top-down negative power. But he argued if power was so repressive, we wouldn't do things. He said power is actually productive. It produces things. It produces discourses or ways we understand the world. So discourse makes possible certain ways of thinking or what we can or cannot say, and it makes possible certain roles in our social world. So there are many ways of using Foucault, and one example comes from Jamie Keller, who you know. So she did a discourse analysis of text from the American Journal of Pharmaceutical Education. So she looked historically over time, over a century, at how pharmacist identity was socially constructed through his discourses. So she's decided, if you think about pharmacy, over the years, there was pharmacists as scientists using a science discourse. There was clinical pharmacy, which is still around, but it's mostly in hospital, but it created the clinical pharmacist. And now we have pharmaceutical care, for example. So her conclusion was that these discourses piled up over time, that it created multiple identities for pharmacists, but some of these identities were incompatible. Discourse analysis can be very time-consuming as archives of texts. We call it an archive as the number of texts in your data set. So Jamie had 100 years. I did a discourse analysis of an OPA journal, as you know, the Ontario Pharmacist, and this covered a span of a decade. So, there may be limitations or there may be a different amounts of data that you use, but still, I think it fits that criteria. This is low cost, but high impact research. I advocate really for the use of both mainstream and critical theories. So even though, they have differ in their approaches or what they considered valid, but because they highlight, and this is a great thing about theories, that they'll highlight different aspects of the same problem, so you get multiple perspectives. So I'm not coming here naive thinking, everyone's going to jump on the social theory bandwagon. But hopefully, I think I was able to provide a few examples. It's not a lot of time, but you can see, you can do, these are not expensive studies. These don't require a huge amount of participants, but they do have a high impact. So I'm not painting an overly rosy picture. I think it's a tough road to hoe for critical qualitative research in science professions. And certainly stories from researchers say, it's hard to get funding sometimes. You're often talking to people who don't understand your work. And, unfortunately, publishers may not recognize the validity of qualitative research. But despite these barriers, I think there's some great advantages. And from a personal perspective, this research speaks to me and it speaks to a lot of other people. So you do become part of a wider research community. So doing critical research and doing advocacy work, I think pushes the profession forward. And in my own personal opinion, I think this is the optimal time for pharmacy to adopt critical theoretical approaches as issues. There's conversations about bias and discrimination in healthcare, and they're coming from medicine and they're coming from nursing, and it's become a hot topic. And I think in pharmacy, because there's not a lot of us working in these perspectives, it's a good time to get in on the ground floor and have an impact early on. So my final words, I think if pharmacy is to join this conversation, then it must be reflexive and ask, how can a professional field producing its own scholarship address critical issues without engaging or drawing on critical approaches? Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Those are some really, really important remarks. And I think thank you for also directing us to some really important research papers that have really been formative in shaping some of those thoughts and
my pleasure.
Comments in your presentation. I am going to quickly introduce our final panelist, who is Mike Felinas. He is the Director of Research Administration at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy. He has over 15 years of research funding administration experience where he's assisted with small and large scale applications and also managed a number of internal funding portfolios. Mike has graduated from the University of Toronto with a Master of Information and has recently started his PhD in pharmaceutical sciences. Mike, I will pass it over to you and take it from there.
Okay, I just want to make sure you can see my slide deck.
Yep, looks great.
Perfect, okay. Well, thank you for the great introduction. I do appreciate that. And I'll try to make my session brief, as I think we only have about 7 minutes. So thinking about how to fund your research, because we've looked at a number of different opportunities from my fellow panelists of how to generate the ideas. I'm just gonna go through the research cycle itself and how to try to find funding for your specific research. Now the research cycle, I have it as nine specific steps, but it is broken down into two sides of a coin. One is the pre-award and one is the post-award. I will share a slide deck with Annalise that you can share with everyone that includes all of my slides for both of these, as I have provided this a similar presentation in the past. But I'll focus on the pre-award here. So as my fellow panelists have indicated, the generation of ideas, you want to make sure that that they're based on your interests, your goals, asking key questions, why is it important? Evaluate the potential of the ideas through literature review, as we've talked about. Is it timely? Is there a need? And will it lead to well-defined results? Is it creative, innovative? And I guess more importantly is, do you enjoy the topic? Because it's probably something you'll be working on for a little bit of time. So you want to make sure that it's enjoyable to you, and that way there it will make the process much more fair. So finding funding, there's a number of different sources that we can evaluate for funding within the faculty. We do have a funding opportunities webpage that we update on a regular basis. And this includes both educational as well as general research funding. There is also a tool that the University of Toronto subscribes to, and this is Pivot. And it's a database that includes a number of different funding opportunities that are both national and international. And it's very easy to get a login for this and to navigate the system by entering keywords. You are able to look at different opportunities that may be available, and it offers a plethora of areas for funding. Within U of T, the central services in the research office, we do have a funding opportunities website, as well as research alerts. And don't forget to visit different associations, foundations. There's government funding, as well as funding from the private sector. I've included a number of internal and external funding opportunities here. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but I will share the slide deck so you'll have access to these. One of the key things to remember, if there are internal funding opportunities, and this is internal within the University of Toronto, we have to keep in mind that there are a number of eligibility requirements. And I can tell you from a couple of these that eligibility requirements are based on undergraduate programs. So when you're looking at proposing different research avenues for teaching related scholarships, the key here is to understand that pharmacy itself does not technically have an undergraduate program, so it is technically ineligible for a few of these programs. However, right, you are able to take this opportunity and collaborate with other units, as much of the research is likely of interest to other faculties, and by collaborating, you'll expand your network, but also give you the opportunity to apply to some of these funding opportunities. So with the proposal development, so you found an opportunity that you think is going to work, you have an idea. Now there's no magic formula here. Practice, it makes perfect when it comes to developing a proposal. My key point here and tip is to start early. Before you do get started, you want to make sure you jot all the ideas down and try to develop a plan, formulate a focused project, and determine kind of what are the needs that you need to complete the work that you've outlined. And specifically, what we're looking at, so if you need someone to complete the work for you, either an undergraduate student, a graduate student, a staff member, and depending on the opportunity, there may or may not be funding for all of these requirements. So how do we get around that? Well, we can be a little bit creative, and we can take advantage of work study students. We can take advantage of undergraduate summer programs, co-op students, API students, and the process of hiring some of these or recruiting some of these students will vary, and it might be directly with HR, it might be through our office, it might be through the Office of Experiential Education, and there's a number of different options here. The next point is fit the mission of the sponsor. So make sure that the work that you're proposing directly fits with what the sponsor is looking for, and this is very important because we want to make sure that what you're proposing is actually what the sponsor wants to fund, and within this we have to actually look at a couple of different things. If you're looking at theoretical work, if the sponsor is asking specifically for idea generation or specific tools in order to develop a process, right? Then it may be eligible. However, if they're asking for something more specific that evidence-based research fits the need, then you want to make sure that that the research that you're proposing actually fits what the call of the proposal is. Finally, there's the development of the overall goal of hypothesis of the proposal itself, and specifically by developing the research aims that will lead to proving or disproving the hypothesis, depending on what that may be. So some of the key fundamentals when it comes to looking at the actual funding opportunity itself is understanding kind of the grant application process and the guidelines. Look at the selection criteria. What is it they're looking at that they're going to evaluate you on? So in many cases, the sponsors will actually post the committee composition. And so take a look to see at the committee and look at who's going to be evaluating your specific proposal. This way, it will ensure that you make the pitch to the appropriate individual based on their specific knowledge. Also understand the adjudication process. Now, the adjudication process is actually very important because certain granting or certain current grant opportunities are focused or are evaluated by committee members directly. Some are sent out to external committee members. By knowing the composition of who's going to be looking at your proposal, you'll have the opportunity to make sure that you orient the proposal and make sure it's a direct fit for those who are going to be reading it. And unfortunately, this is something that takes a little bit of practice because it is a balancing act, trying to make sure that it's something that many different types of individuals are able to read and understand. One of the key things that I do, and I should cover this a little bit later, is when you have your colleagues read your proposal, make sure that call colleagues directly in your field, but also send it to a couple of colleagues or even friends that are outside of the field. If they understand it, you've written a well-structured proposal that will be understood by any composition of a specific committee. One of the key things that I would recommend is reviewing successful applications that have been submitted. And when you do write the proposal, follow the topics that are included or either in the selection criteria or specifically in the guidelines if they want you to structure it in a particular way. It might not always make sense, but we want to make sure that it's easy for the committee to evaluate it, to get the information that they require, and to be able to grade it accordingly. Now for proposal submission, depending on where it is that you're going to be working on this and who's going to be submitting it based on your appointment status. If the research is conducted at the University of Toronto, generally approval is required at the faculty level, but it may be also required from the institutional level. Now, if it's from the faculty level, this would require a signature from either the dean or the ABR. If it's an institutional signature that's required, this is something that you would have to submit through my research application, and it would have to be approved through the Office of the Vice President, Research and Innovation. There's also research ethics. Some sponsors require research ethics ahead of or before submission of or at the time of submission of the application. So then the majority will actually require it afterwards. In order to prepare and submit your research ethics, this has to be done through my research application or MRA through the either human or animal ethics protocol gateways. And I think I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. And thank you to everyone online. I know we've gone a bit over, well, over today is an understatement, but I think such valuable insights from our presenters. And to be honest, I didn't really want to cut any of you off. So I think there's that piece. And also the fact that I'm really grateful we've had everyone stay online with us pretty much from the beginning of the event till now. So thank you so much for all of your remarks. I think at this point, I will encourage anyone online to follow up with any of our presenters individually if you'd like. Maybe this has also just given you a lot to think about and lots to digest during this time. On behalf of the CPE, I would like to thank Naomi, Henry, Mike, Tim, and Annie for their remarks. Like I said, this was just absolutely fantastic and a real array of thoughts. And this is something new that we've tried out at the CPE of actually having more of a panel format where people are able to kind of weigh in from a variety of perspectives. So I will encourage everyone to reach out to any of our presenters. I'll also suggest that people reach out to Zubin and I if they have any thoughts about how we can really foster more of a supportive educational research network here at LDFP. I think that there is quite a bit of interest in learning more about this topic and really having some more mentorship. I think several of our presenters really touched on the fact of collaboration and like looking to other people to build a career in this space. So I don't think this conversation is going anywhere. I wish all of you a very good evening. Thank you again to our presenters, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone in our CPE community in 2022. So thank you very much.